Welcome back. This is Sandy with Sandy's Organized Chaos, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how I like to achieve that glittered plaid look on tumblers. Now, plaid is something that, it can be a little tricky, but this way that I'm going to be showing you guys is the way that has worked the best for me over the years. So if you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and let's wake up, prep these tumblers, and slay all day. Let's do this. Now I'm starting out with a 24-ounce curved hogdle, there we go, that I purchased through the Stainless Depot. This is probably my second favorite shape to use whenever it comes to making glittered tumblers. Now I've already prepped and primed my tumbler. I just painted it this basic white. I figured it would show up really well with the colors that I plan on using today. So we're gonna go ahead and start with the base of our plaid. I chose two colors. I chose Beloved, which was a pink, and Crocus, which is a purple. And what we want to do is mix a 50-50 mix of our glitter. So I just buy these little medicine cups which are perfect for this. It has all the measurements on the side already, and I did 10 mLs. I did the ml side, which had other stuff. Anyways, I did 10 mLs of my purple, 10 mLs of the pink, and I'm just going to mix that up really good. Now, I find when I'm doing this, I just like to put on a piece of paper and kind of transport it back and forth like this a couple times just to make sure it is fully mixed together. And that is what we are left with. Now, the next thing you want to do is go ahead and apply your mixture onto your tumbler. I'm just going to use my amazing sealer. You can use Mod Podge, however you guys want to do it. I'm going to take my fluffy brush here, my fluffy makeup brush I bought from the $1.25 tree. And I'm going to go ahead and put my glue on. Now, I did not do the handle this round because I didn't know if I wanted to do the handle, but I end up doing the handle, obviously the second round of glitter that I put on. I also didn't fully coat the tumbler in this, and I went about a brush's width down below where the handle was because I already knew I wanted to do a chunky ombre, so I just figured I didn't really need to fully do up my tumbler today. But if you do want some of that glitter kind of poking through on your chunky on the bottom, then obviously go ahead and fully coat this with your 50-50 mix here. Now I'm going to go ahead and set that off to the side, let it fully dry. Once it's fully dry, I'm going to come back through with my chip brush and sweep off any little extra glitters that might be on there. This just really helps out when you go to do up your second coat of glitter, so that way your glue brush doesn't get all gunked up with all the little glitters. So I'm just going to sweep that off. I'm going to go ahead and apply my second coat. And as you guys will see here, I went ahead and I did the handle as well. And I did try to straighten up my line as well, because since I'm using a white glitter, you kind of will be able to see that just a little bit through the white glitter. So you just want to make sure that the line where you end is as straight as possible. Mine still wasn't as straight, but just make it as straight as possible. So we're going to set that off to the side, let that dry up really well, and repeat the process where we sweep off any little extra glitters off of the tumbler. Now, before we move on to our template for our plaid, I'm going to go ahead and spray this down really well with my semi-gloss. I did about 2 coats of that. It just really helps our template be able to kind of adhere a little bit better because we're going to be doing it right over the raw glitter here. So for the template, I'm just going to make a basic rectangle shape. I use the square here. I'm going to unlock it. I'm going to put it at the measurements that I need. I did 11 inches in the length, and then I did 1 inch with the height. So that's pretty much all I did. And then I just duplicated that up about 10 times is all that would fit. And for this tumbler, that was perfect. I only had a couple left over, but if you're doing a full tumbler, you're probably going to need to make up a couple of these just so you have them on hand. Or you could also use painter's tape as well, whichever one you guys would like to use. So essentially we are building our own template right onto our tumbler here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my vertical lines first. I'm going to go ahead and get that first one going. You just want to make sure that it is straight as possible and just really focus just on the upper portion or wherever you'd like your plaid to be. You don't really need to worry about the bottom or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and line that up as good as I possibly can here. I'm going to go ahead and tape that down, and then I'm going to go ahead and trim up the bottom here, and I'm going to use that extra little piece to help me figure out how big my gaps need to be along my vertical lines. So as you see, I just laid it right against my first stripe there. Now I'm going to take another piece of my vinyl. I'm going to lay that right next to it, and I'm just going to completely repeat that process all the way around my tumbler. And I forgot to mention, I just cut that out on a basic vinyl. I have a bunch of vinyls that I don't use, and I tend to just use those for things like this, for like peekaboos and templates and stuff. But like I said earlier, you could absolutely use a basic painter's tape. That's what I used for years, but I kind of like the idea of being able to make it the size that I would like to, especially when you have different size tumblers that you're working with. So now that that's all complete, we're going to go ahead and start working on our horizontal lines. So as you see here, I have a little extra piece of vinyl and I wanted to trim that down because I didn't want it touching the other vinyl because it could potentially stick to it and pull it up, and we don't want that. So I just trimmed it down a little bit, and we are just going to repeat this process but going horizontally down our tumbler. Now, there we go. Going horizontally is a little bit trickier because you have the chance of it kind of going askew, and we don't want that. So you're just going to keep on taking our little helper guy there and readjusting it around as you go to kind of make sure that your lines are staying as straight as you possibly can. Because we got a lot of things coming at us here. We have a handle, we have a little bit of a curve coming up here, but it is extremely simple, and I know you guys got this. Now, when I get to that last line down there, basically it's just the top of my vinyl that's attached to the tumbler. The bottom wasn't really pressed down because that curve starts there. So you just want to make sure that everything is as flat as possible against the glitter. This is, again, just more or less a template. Now, I did have a little bit of a weird gap in the back, but I just took another piece of vinyl and kind of layered that on, and you honestly can't even tell after it was all said and done. So my favorite kind of brush to use are these little foam brushes. I really like the angles that it has at the tip of it there. It just really helps out. This is just a basic 1-inch foam brush that I got from the Dollar Tree. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my glue and I'm going to pounce my glue on because, again, this is a stencil or a template, and that vinyl isn't fully secured down onto the glitter, and this is just going to really help out us not getting any big gloops of glitter underneath that vinyl where we don't want it. Now, from our 50-50 mix, we're going to start individually using those glitters, and the first one I'm going to use is my purple that I used, and we're going to be using that purple all the way around on our stencil here. So we won't be using that second glitter until we remove our stencil. I'll show you guys in a second. I know you got this. So let's go ahead and take a look at the handle. I'm going to glue it up just like I was doing my other plaid spots, and now I'm going to go ahead and just come right up my handle here, and I'm just going to look at it straight on, and I'm going to see where I need to end that glue, which is these little foam brushes are great for that. You can get a nice straight line. I'm not too worried about the back side of my handle. I just more or less want the sides of it, the little bit of a side that it has, and the top of it to extend that plaid look up onto it. And I'm just going to continue to go down my handle doing the same motion where I go ahead and do up underneath, and then just look at it straight on and see where I need to extend that look out onto the handle as well. And just again, continuing that process, layering up my purple glitter until everything is fully coated with my purple glitter right inside of my stencil here. Now, I am not overly concerned about doing too much touch-ups because after we remove our stencil or our template, we'll be able to come back through and kind of touch up any little areas that we might want to just readjust a little bit. So there we go. Our handle is all glittered, and now I'm just going to finish up doing the rest of my squares. Now, as soon as I'm done doing my squares, I'm going to go ahead and take a razor knife and I'm going to cut my template. It just makes it easier to peel back. I didn't let this dry or anything like that. We're just moving on to going ahead and peeling off this template right away. Now, once your template is peeled off, now you can kind of come through and adjust any of your squares here. I also like to dab down any big pieces of glue that might have accidentally got under there just to help out when we go to do up our next stuff. It helps it dry a little bit quicker. And then I'm just going to come through again and just tidy it up and make sure everything looks as nice as possible. So I did let that dry for a little while just to make sure that my next color won't kind of stick to my purple squares. We don't want that. So I'm going to take that same foam brush that I was using earlier, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to make up my own squares, and they're going to go right in these empty lines here in between every single one of our purple squares. Okay, all right. You got this. I know you do. So I'm just going to take my brush and I'm going to go from corner to corner, just taking it, making my own square shape right in between, just like that. And this brush makes it so much more simpler when you go to do it. Then all I'm going to do is just lightly dab in between, making sure I fill in my glitter really good. And I'm going to do that. I just did 2. I didn't go all the way down to the very bottom, so I just did 2 because I figured we're doing the chunkies anyway, so these 2 were just fine. I'm going to fill those in, and then I'm going to take that second color that we used in our 50-50 mix, which was the Beloved, and that's where this glitter is going to go. So I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle this on. I'm going to give it a little tap down onto my glue to make sure that it sticks down really well. I'm just going to make sure I shake off the excess a little bit, and there we go. Our plaid is almost done. Now I'm just going to repeat that process again right in between my purple squares, just filling it in with the pink here, and do that completely around. So quick recap, we did our 50-50 mix. We put that onto our tumbler. We let that dry up a little bit. We went ahead and did up our template, our stencil there. We applied one of our glitters from our 50-50 mix. We went ahead and pulled that template off right away. Now we're going ahead and putting in the rest of our squares and the empty lines that we had there right in between our purple, and we're just going to use the extra glitter, the other glitter that we used in our 50-50 mix. Now I'm going to go ahead and let this tumbler dry completely. You want it fully dry. And before I give it a good spray of my 2x Ultra Clear, before I apply my epoxy, I am going to take my chip brush and kind of sweep off those excess glitters one more time just to make sure there's nothing too much kind of floating around. I'm going to give it 2 coats of my clear sealer, and then it'll be ready to apply our first layer of epoxy. So I made up 20 milliliters of epoxy. That was more than enough to go over not only the raw glitter, but to help our chunky glitters that we're going to be using lay flat on the bottom as well. So not only are you trying to cover up the raw glitter, you're also going to be applying more glitter. So this was definitely more than enough. You just want to make sure that you have all that glitter fully covered with this epoxy. And as you see, when I do the handle, I just kind of like to dip it into my epoxy before I start applying it there. It just really helps out and make sure that there's not going to be too many gunky buildup parts of that epoxy around the handle. And once we have that applied, we're going to go ahead and start putting on our ombre. All right, so our epoxy is applied and we're ready to put on our ombre portion onto the bottom. I'm using cottontail for my chunky, and I'm going to start with my chunky first. I always do. And I'm going to completely fill up my bottom first, and then I'm going to slowly kind of bring it down the side. Now, typically when I do an ombre, I basically almost have it standing upright to get that good like fade down the side, but I kind of wanted a little bit more control over it because I didn't want my glitters floating up too much into the top of my tumbler. So I'm actually just kind of gradually bringing it down myself and just doing this effect by hand rather than letting gravity take control. And by me doing this as well, I'm able to ensure that those chunky glitters are able to kind of lay flat, because that will definitely help out when we go to apply our epoxy over top of this raw glitter after this has cured. So now that I have my chunkies applied, I'm going to take my opposite hand, which still has the glove on it, and I'm going to go ahead and tap down all my chunky glitters to make sure that they're squished around, moved around, and have enough space to do what they need to do. So now that my glitter was all tapped down, I'm going to go ahead and take my fine glitter and fill in the rest of it. I'm using Pinnacle. This really, I thought, matched really well with Cottontail here. And I'm going to go ahead and just load up my bottom, and then I'm going to do the same process where I just slowly bring down the glitter myself, so that way I can give it the fade that I would like to, so it doesn't come up too far up onto my tumbler. I'm just going to make sure that I hit up around where it starts to fade just a little bit, so that way it kind of gradually fades into one another, just kind of fill in that line that we made as well with our plaid. And after I'm done applying my glitter here, I'm going to go ahead and put it onto my turner and let that cure, and then we'll be ready to add our second coat of epoxy over top of this. All right, it's fully cured and we're ready to apply another coat of epoxy over top. This is another 20 mLs. I'm going to fully use up that entire 20 mLs, so that way it has a nice flood coating around it. Just double checking, every once in a while whenever this goes back onto my turner to make sure that there's no buildup around the handle as I go. And then after this has cured, we'll be ready to start sanding it down and prepping it for our decal. All right, it's nice and cured once more. Now keep in mind the top portion already has 2 coats of glitter and it is pretty smooth, but the bottom only has 1 coat of glitter, so you want to be very careful when you go to do the sanding. Maybe not even sand it down too much, but I definitely like to come through and do up my rim. I'm going to take my sanding block. I think I have 100 grit sandpaper that I use, and on top of my 80 grit sanding block that I use to get my rim down really well. And I'm going to be very gentle around my handle too when I do my sanding, because you run run the chance of accidentally going down to the steel if you rub a little too hard with everything. So just be very careful. And I'm taking that 100 grit sanding paper that I'm using, and I'm just very lightly going over, like very lightly, not pushing too hard, just very lightly going over any little points just to help out the next process of epoxy and make sure everything's nice and smooth. But my top portion was very smooth and ready for its decal, so I didn't have to worry about that too much. I'm gonna go ahead and just rinse it off with basic water, and then we'll start getting our decal on. So for my decal, I wanted something just very neutral. I bought this big pack of vinyls off of Amazon, and I also bought this beautiful opal vinyl from Courtney's Customs because she sells vinyl as well, and I had to buy some. So I'm using some of her vinyl on top of some other vinyl that I purchased, and I couldn't decide. I knew I wanted to keep it neutral with just the pretty shimmery look of the opal vinyl on top, and I couldn't decide between the white and this kind of off pink. And I ended up choosing the off pink. Am I light pink? Anyways, it almost looks like an off-white. Maybe that's why I was saying it like that. But I went ahead and chose the light pink for it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my pieces cut out, and then I'm gonna show you guys how I did my decal. Because since I'm using an opal vinyl, technically, whenever you're doing your layering, you would want to do a coat of epoxy over top of what's underneath, because the opal vinyl will be able to kind of show through any little lines that you make. But I'm going to make it so that way I don't have to do that. And okay, I'll show you guys. Anyways, so I have my S here. Now when I'm doing this type of monogram, I like something simple in the back, and I like something a little bit fancier in the front. I'll make sure to put the fonts that I use. I just got it right off my Cricut design space. So I chose my two fonts. I have my big S in the back, and then I have my name right here that I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and line these guys up. And you just want to adjust everything now before you do the next step of it. So after I get it all lined up, I am going to apply an offset to my name portion. And I think I did a 0.69. I thought that was good enough. And I'm going to go ahead and apply that offset. I'm going to move my top portion out of the way. I'm going to take the offset and the S, and I'm going to weld them together. And there we go. Now I don't have to do two separate steps. I can do it all in one swoop like this. So I went ahead and did those up gray so I could print them out on the same mat. I don't know if you guys know that trick or not. I'm going to go ahead and weed here. As you see, it's all cut out in one thing. I'm going to go ahead and take my opal, and then I'm just going to layer that over top. But before I learned this, I used to do up the S, and then I'd put a coat of epoxy, and then I'd put my opals over top, so that way I didn't have that crease on there that could accidentally happen, and this just makes it easier. That's what I think, at least. I don't know. All right, so now when I go to put this onto my handled tumbler, I'm gonna go ahead and put its lid on. It just really helps me figure out where I need to put my decal. I'm gonna go ahead and screw that on as tight as I can until it gets around to the front. I'm gonna see where that needs to be lined up, so about right there. There's actually a seam right in the middle of the lids that helps out as well. And just so I could see that when I go to apply my decal, I'm gonna take a dry erase marker, there we go, and I'm just going to make a line so that way I kind of know where the center is, and that wipes off right after we're all done. So now that my line's there and I know where to put my decal, I'm going to go ahead and put my decal on. I'm going to burnish that up really good. Now, I really enjoy the simplicity of the S behind it, but you could obviously also do an offset of the S as well, kind of doing the same process where you highlight and slice and all that, and you can just do it all in one fell swoop rather than having to do an extra coat of epoxy and all that. Maybe that's for another time, but there we go. Now we're ready to apply our epoxy. Now, because I'm using opals, or an opal vinyl, I went ahead and I did give it a little spritz of my 2x Ultra just to make sure that that epoxy won't wick away off of our vinyl, because sometimes it does that. Now, I didn't stir up my epoxy. I am using another 20 mLs of epoxy here. I didn't stir that up yet because I wanted to go ahead and add just a little bit of extra sparkle into my epoxy. So I'm going to go ahead and optional. Again, very optional. I'm going to go ahead and add a little extra sparkle into my epoxy. I'm going to get that epoxy whipped up really good. I think it's recommended 3 minutes is how long you should stir up your epoxy. So go ahead and whip that up really good. After it's all done, you're going to go ahead and apply it. You're going to let that cure. You're going to apply a second coat if need be, and you're going to let that cure again, and she is good to go. Whether you take this design and duplicate it as is, or you take it and let it inspire you to create something that is completely your own, I hope that you guys had a lot of fun watching this tutorial today. Again, if you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time.